Humans have been fighting with other humans since the beginning of time, and while we've gotten pretty good at offing each other in very creative ways, we didn't start off with bullets. So here are 7 insane ancient weapons that were actually used in combat. Mayan Hornet Bomb. Okay, so we're gonna start with the primitive weapons first, and then work our way towards more advanced stuff. And this first one is right from Mother Nature herself. The Mayan Hornet Bomb was essentially exactly what it sounds like. It was a primitive bomb that contained a swarm of angry hornets that, when released, would viciously sting whoever was near them. Hornets are actually known to kill up to 50 people a year in present-day Japan, so they definitely can be dangerous, and the Mayans figured out how to weaponize these ornery insects to inflict maximum pain on their enemies. You may be now wondering, what's the difference between a bee and a hornet anyway? Aren't bees our friends, pollinating flowers and stuff? Well, size for one thing. Hornets are bigger, and unlike bees who are pretty much vegan, hornets like to eat meat. But probably the biggest difference when it comes to being used as a weapon, bees can only go on kamikaze missions and die when they sting something. Hornets, on the other hand, can shank you with their venom-filled stinger as many times as they want. Now, you can't just pick up a hornet's nest and hold it until you're ready to use it without expecting to become a casualty of war yourself. So the Mayans not only had to figure out how to collect the hornets, but also how to keep them alive and store them safely so they could be used in battle. They would carefully transfer the hornets from their nest to clay pots or gourds using smoke, and then seal them in with wax or clay, leaving holes so the bugs could breathe. When the time for war came, the Mayan warriors would carry these pots and gourds into battle, and right before they would use them, they would shake the bombs to get the hornets really pissed off. Then they would lob the hornet bomb at their enemy. The bomb would break open, and instantly a swarm of angry hornets would fly out and start stinging whoever was near them. The Mayans also used these hornet bombs in booby traps. When defending a position, they would create dummy soldiers with the hornet bomb placed as the decoy's head. They would then dress the dummy with warrior headgear and position them in key locations. When their enemy would charge in and try to club one of these dummies on the head, the gourd would split open and the attacker would be greeted with a face full of angry hornets stinging their eyeballs. Poop. Poop is gross, and I don't think anyone likes being around it. Human waste is something your body is trying to get rid of, and for good reason. Not only does it smell, it's filled with all sorts of bacteria that can make you very sick. So, of course, humans figured out how to use their doo-doo as a primitive bioweapon. Now, you're probably thinking of cavemen slinging shit at each other like monkeys, right? Come on, we're more evolved than that. We can do better. Let's first take a look at the ancient Scythians. They coated their arrows with a poison made of human poop, blood, and viper excrement. When these arrows hit someone, the wound would easily become infected and gangrenous, causing a slow, painful death. In medieval Europe, poop was a strategic resource. Military geniuses like Conrad Kaiser recommended it for both offense and defense, storing the brown stuff in barrels for future use. And when the bubonic plague rolled around, flinging the feces of the afflicted over castle walls was all the rage. And let's not forget ancient China, where they would load up catapults and trebuchets to launch dirty bombs made of poop, hemp string, and gunpowder over castle walls during sieges. Sure, that made a mess. Anyways, poop was also used as a weapon as recently as the Vietnam War. The Viet Cong would coat sharp punji sticks with human feces and place them at the bottom of booby traps, hoping an American GI would fall into them. The GIs would slip and fall into these traps and were pierced by these punji sticks and would suffer horrible infections. Which kinda leads into the next weapon, Guai Jian. Now, this one technically could have been included in the last section, but I think it deserves its own. Guai Jian, or the ghost arrow, was an ancient Chinese weapon and booby trap that was kinda like stepping on Legos that could kill you. While at first glance, they kinda look like toys or pieces from a kid's game, don't let appearances fool you. Guai Jian was an extremely dangerous weapon not just for the victims, but also for the user. These iron caltrops were sharp and were slow cooked in human feces and poison to coat them entirely with dangerous bacteria. After coating, they would be held in specially made bamboo containers to protect the handler. To use them, the soldier would sprinkle the poisonous caltrops on the ground for a foot soldier or horse to step on. They were mainly used to protect flanks or to retreat from battle. Reportedly, they were also used in naval warfare and shot from a distance onto enemy ships. Imagine standing on deck and taking one of those to the neck! Holy shit, I actually hit him! Chinese wolf brush. Speaking of Chinese naval warfare, it's the 16th century and China is having a serious pirate problem. These aren't your average swashbucklers. These are wokwo, a fearsome blend of cultures including Korean but mostly Japanese marauders. they were pillaging and plundering along the Chinese coast using large two-handed swords that could easily chop through wood or bamboo. Bad news for any defender holding a standard issue spear. So how do you counter such a threat? You've got a few options. Option A, a super long spear to poke from a distance. Option B, a shield that could withstand the sword strikes. Or Option C, a bamboo branch.
What?
This was the choice of Qi Jiguan, one of China's greatest military strategists. The wolf brush wasn't just any branch. This was a 13 to 16 feet long shaft made of ultra-hard tortoiseshell bamboo that weighed around 9 pounds. This bamboo was toughened up even more with tung oil and then fire hardened. At the end of the wolf's brush was a spear tip and branches that were intentionally left on the bamboo stalk. Each branch's tip was dipped in a lethal poison. The wolf brush was used mainly in a defensive position known as the Mandarin Duck Formation. Supported by soldiers armed with spears, swords, and shields, the brush holder would thrust the bamboo spear at enemy attackers, trying to prick them with one of the poisonous branches. Say ni hao to my little friend! While it was large and kind of unwieldy, the wolf brush turned out to be extremely effective, as once the people getting hit by the poison branches started passing out, the enemies would try to stay away from it. Some designs were even said to be able to fend off arrows, so it was also good for defense. The wolf brush also required virtually no training, as it was basically just a long stick. You basically just waggled the big bamboo stalk at people's faces and hoped for the best, and it usually worked out. Eventually, the bamboo branches were upgraded to iron branches, which made them even more effective at slicing and poisoning the enemy. Urumi Whip Sword. This one seems like something a kid would come up with when designing their own superhero, but it's real, and it was deadly. Invented in the 11th century in southern India in a region called Kerala, the Urumi Whip Sword is basically exactly what it sounds like, a cross between a sword and a whip. The Urumi featured a standard sword handle that was connected to one of more flexible metal blades that measured 3 to 5 feet long. Some models had up to 32 blades. The Urumi was used differently than a standard sword. Instead of trying to chop someone's head or arm off with one blow, the user would instead swing the blades around like a whip, trying to slice chunks from their enemy. The flexible blades made it difficult to defend against. If you held up a shield against an Urumi user, chances are the blade would just wrap around it and cut you in the arm. Skilled Urumi users could whip around the blade so quickly they turned into a spinning ball of death. Now, this seems great, until you realize that flexible blades can also flex in your direction. It was just as easy to cut off your toes or chunks of your legs when using it. This is why the Urumi was the last weapon taught to young warriors. Mastering the Urumi was challenging, but if you were able to do so, you would be virtually untouchable on the battlefield. Plus, you look freaking cool when you use it. Tianbing Jian. Okay, this one might be my favorite one on this list. The Tianbing Jian, or Heavenly Soldier Arrow, was a weapon used in ancient China that was essentially a kite loaded with rockets and bombs. The Tianbing Jian was a huge war kite that measured around 9 feet by 4 feet, made of straw and wood. It would be loaded with a rocket pod that contained 100 rocket arrows and a few dozen bombs. The rocket arrows were essentially normal arrows with a bottle rocket strapped to it. When lit, they would fly toward their target at insane speeds. This war kite was mainly used in night raids. A long, slow-burning fuse connected to the rocket pod was lit, and the kite flyer would fly the Tianbing Jian into an enemy fort or behind enemy lines. The goal was to get the kite in position near the sleeping enemy before the fuse reached the rocket pod. Because the kite was flown at night using nothing but the wind, it was silent and could enter into enemy territory completely undetected. The Chinese were the ones who discovered gunpowder, so these war kites were essentially the first bombing raids in human history. There was also another version of this war kite called the Tian Lei Pao, which instead of a rocket box, used a death row convict strapped to the kite armed with rockets and bombs. The convict's job was to fly into enemy territory on the kite and manually launch the rockets and bombs in a kamikaze mission. At least these inmates got to go out with a bang. The Claw of Archimedes. It's the tail end of the 3rd century BCE, and the Second Punic War between Rome and Carthage is causing chaos and collateral damage throughout the Mediterranean. Caught in the middle of this war was one of history's greatest minds in mathematics and engineering, Archimedes, who was living in Syracuse, a city on the island of Sicily. Sicily was a highly valued strategic position for both the Romans and Carthaginians, which made it a prime target for both armies. So in 214 BCE, the Romans arrive at Syracuse and begin a siege. The people of the city turn to Archimedes to come up with a plan, a weapon, anything that could help stop the Romans from invading their city. So, like an old-timey Oppenheimer, Archimedes put his big brain to work and came up with one of the nerdiest weapons of ancient history, the Claw of Archimedes. The Archimedes Claw was essentially a giant crane that was mounted onto the city walls. Attached to the crane was a giant hook or claw that was large enough to snag onto Roman ships. When the Romans sailed too close to the wall, the crane's claw would be dropped onto the ship, hoping to hook something on board. Once the claw was secured, the crane would lift the ship into the air, tossing its crew into the water. The ship would then be released, and with luck, it would capsize or be destroyed from the impact and sink to the ocean floor. Archimedes also reportedly created a solar death ray out of mirrors, which focused the sun's energy onto the wooden Roman boats and set them on fire. The Romans became frustrated by the effectiveness of Archimedes' inventions, and orders were sent from top commanders to find and capture him alive once they were in the city. A brilliant mind like Archimedes designing weapons for the Romans was a dream for these generals. Unfortunately for everyone, the Roman soldiers didn't really know what Archimedes looked like. When they finally entered the city, one of the soldiers found an old man studying in his room. The old man rudely told the soldier to get out of his house, and the soldier, annoyed by the disrespect, responded by killing him on the spot. Oops, turns out that old man was Archimedes, and the Roman general in command of the siege was not very happy that happened.